Hey everyone, it's Jesse here. I am introducing a speaker here. His name is Joerg Droege. He is a writer with Scene World magazine, and he is a game industry hobbyist. And he wants to talk to us or talk with us on hobbyism, talking to game industry people, things along those lines. Listen in, learn some stuff, and go ahead and take it away.
Thank you. So, hello everybody. Glad that I got the chance to talk to you here. So, I will start with first introducing myself a bit, who I am, what I'm doing, and I will also take a look at the Power Up main stage chat. So, ask away your questions while I'm talking, and I will answer them as I speak, so that we get the hour full. With answering questions, and hopefully you learn something by what I say. Okay, so let's start with who I am and what I'm actually doing. So my name is Joerg Droege, as you just heard, and I'm from Germany. And I'm doing this whole video game industry journalism thing mainly as a hobby. And interestingly, I started with video games by my grandfather, who also liked playing video games, and he got me a Commodore 64 at my 8th birthday, which was 1990. That means I'm 34 now, and as you probably know, the average gamer is between 35 and 45. So I'm actually just in this statistical scheme of an average gamer. So maybe this is interesting to know. So I started with this Commodore hobby and this retro hobby, and in 2001 actually I got the idea, why not making a magazine for the Commodore 64 that would cover all the news from America and Europe, because that wasn't done before yet. And everybody was like, okay, this is crazy, making a magazine on a diskette for Commodore 64 in 2001. Why would you do that? That's a waste of time. So over the times it grew, and actually we started out quite well. And then in 2012, actually, I started expanding it into interviewing tech pioneers via Skype video. So I thought, okay, why not? It's a good idea. Why not doing that? And so one of my achievements was that I was the final guy to interview Ralph Baer, who is known as the inventor of video gaming, home video gaming. And he unfortunately died at 92. And I was the one who did the last interview with him, and the longest one for over an hour. So that's kind of interesting, because as a teenager, I always had this dream, reading books and stuff about famous people, famous tech pioneers. And I thought it would be nice to talk to some of them at some point. And the video game industry and the tech industry in general kind of enabled me to do that. So, and that's quite interesting, because well, I never thought I would actually get the possibility to do that, because as a child, as a teenager, you have a lot of dreams, a lot of plans, and as we all know, most of those plans, they don't turn into reality. And one thing that is really good about the game industry, that it's, since the last 6 years, I think a lot connected to the retro computing industry, because as we all know, like 2010, suddenly things from the 80s, 90s became hip again and cool again. So I think all this played together, and suddenly my hobby was interesting again. And suddenly I saw myself running a podcast and a magazine, and even be invited by Gamescom at the retro area and making a booth every year. So maybe I should say in between, if you want to check that out, what I'm doing right now, or later on, we have a homepage at sceneworld.org, and also we have an entry at the English Wikipedia. If you search for Scene World, you can actually find all our history. Because for some reason we suddenly got important enough to be listed at Wikipedia as an article. So that was quite nice. So anyway, so this whole thing, as I said, expanded into video interviews and also into a podcast. So that's interesting because suddenly I was talking to companies like 3D Realms or companies like Konami that I only knew from my childhood, or from playing video games from those companies, like Duke Nukem and stuff. And suddenly I was actually working with them, interviewing them. So what I do here is actually we have like two sections. One is like the history sections, where we cover history of tech pioneers and about their history. And the podcast is more about the recent things that people in the industry are doing right now. Yeah, well, I'm kind of living my dream. Yeah, but it's just a hobby. It's not my main employment. And that's so interesting here because the hobby really grew. So, yes. So, and I want to talk about that experience actually. So, what happened there from there on? Well, so as I said, we started with the video interviews in 2012, and then we we had our booth at Gamescom, and I met people in the film industry and movie industry, more like I would say television people. And so it's interesting. So suddenly I found myself working at a project where I interview people from the game industry and the demo scene for a project, for an exhibit at the Film Institute of Frankfurt, Germany. For the that was part of the European Union to preserve to preserve all video games, to preserve culture. So that means last year I was also involved into such a project, and suddenly I found myself interviewing the Tron guy, who is a well-known cosplayer, because an IT expert got the idea of building a costume out of the movie. I mean, most of us probably know the movie Tron, which I think was from '84 something. Yeah, so suddenly I'm interviewing people like him and other people like from 3D Realms. Yes, and that's quite interesting also, I think, because if you realize that it was actually just a dream, suddenly it became interesting. And suddenly it became like the industry really wanted to know my opinion about something, So it also means that my life changed a bit. I mean, having your own booth at Gamescom, which is the biggest computer game fair in the world, and it's growing bigger each year. Actually, the tickets are already sold out for this year in Cologne, and it's supposed to be twice as big as last time from the visitor scale. So that means we will have a lot of visitors at our booth. And I also think it's interesting to see at an event like Gamescom how the audience changed for the video game industry. And I think this is interesting for you because I'm a child of the 80s and 90s. I was growing up with diskettes and cartridges for game consoles, and joysticks and so on. But if you look at how kids nowadays actually react on the Gamescom event, it's like they never saw a joystick before, they never saw a diskette before, and they are asking me like, what are you doing? So it's interesting. So actually, what we do there is we put on some computers there at our booth, and we do this together with a team, with a crew that is doing video game music on old retro games, on old Ataris. And I put on a Commodore 64 with my diskette magazine, and yeah, and well, I wouldn't say that the kids are too young to know what a joystick is or what a diskette is, It's not only that, it's also that most average parents, I would say, wouldn't teach their kids what was before them because it's probably not too interesting. But for me, as I have this retro hobby, I kind of live in the present and the past, because when people tell me, oh, the good old times, like the Commodore and like the Amiga, for me, this is all still present, So it's kind of interesting. And I see also this change in the video game industry, like indie game development, what we are talking here in this conference this week. It's also going towards retro, blocky graphics, old concepts. We are going back to simple, it seems, Right. So I think this indie game development has a lot to do with retro gaming and with the old times from the 80s, 90s. So I also cover with my magazine, my podcast, a lot of indie development, And it's also interesting to see old video game labels coming back, like 3D Realms, like Cinemaware Retro, and other companies, I mean, just last year, Sierra relived, I mean, I remember Sierra as King's Quest, or as their ultimate pinball series, where that little monster would say Sierra at the beginning when you start the game. And now this is all coming back. And I think this is not coming back because of the young gamers, but because of the average gamer, which is between, as we know, 35 and 45. Because they remember those old labels and games from the past. And they see like, oh, wow, I know this brand. I've seen this before. Right. So I think this is how the development goes right now. And hopefully for you as a listener, as a developer, as somebody, as a part of the video game industry, you should have an ear on the audience and what they want and why they want it. I mean, I have seen this a lot of times recently, you know, that the company from the old days would 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 return with a new game, you know, like, we do a new game. And then you have this problem that like half of the audience, half of the ratings is pretty bad, and the other half is pretty good. And the question I was asked a lot of times is, why is that? And here I think it is why, because I think that in this exact example, the game was more aimed towards retro gamers, not towards the modern nowadays gamers, you know, who want good graphics and, well, you know, virtual reality is coming right now, being the next big thing, you know. And so you see some certain types of games are more appealing to people who actually love playing on the Super Nintendo, you know. And this is interesting because when I was scamming around reviews of that particular game without mentioning the name, to be fair here, I saw that the reviewers, you know, from let's say ENG Romania or whatever, they would say, wow, this game is great because it reminds me of the Super Nintendo games that I used to play. Yeah. When the other reviewers, the younger ones, they were mostly looking for modern, most likely games. So yes, so I think as a game developer, it's pretty important to have a look at that. And it's kind of interesting because I'm seeing myself more in the middle. I mean, I'm a gamer, but I'm also doing this scene world journalism thing, and I'm also, as I said, running a booth at Gamescom each year. So I cover a lot of sites from the industry, and it's interesting to see a lot of angels and and developers and companies, video game companies, asking for my opinion. You know, yeah, that's quite nice. Well, so I'm supposed to talk about experiences, my experiences here. Well, yes, well, that's actually an interesting thing is also that I think the society changed kind of. And for example, I remember in the 80s, 90s was kind of, you know, not so well seen when somebody was a gamer, a nerd or something. It wasn't so social per se. But nowadays you have things like cosplay and so on, and more media penetration, like on television, you know, like YouTube also. So things are much more spread thanks to the internet. Yeah. Right. So you see, I can already talk 20 minutes about such general things. So anyway, let's talk a bit about my most memorable moments, you know. Interesting, for example, is to talk about the video game crash that happened in 83 and to think about what to do to not make it happen again in a way. I mean, as a game developer or as a gamer or general, as somebody interested in games, you always hear things like, oh, PC gaming will die soon. I mean, I'm hearing that since 2000, no, since 1996. And, you know, that PC gaming will crash. Well, and now somebody else says in the chat, no, PC gaming's not going to die, consoles will. It's right. Consoles have a single purpose, gaming, but somebody actually managed to put Linux on it. So you can turn that around and say, okay, game consoles can also be a nice productive computer in a way. Yeah, right. So anyway, I had this discussion too with pioneers in the video game industry. Right. Oh yes, you're right. People actually put Linux on the PS3 once, and actually, for those to whom it was promised that it would run Linux, they actually got some money back recently. Yeah, those gamers who bought PS3 just for the reason that it allows to run Linux. So Google it in some press to get more info on that. So anyway, I wanted to talk about a video game crash and if PC gaming is going to die and so on. So I had a very good, interesting discussion about that topic, with David Crane, who was also one of the founders of Activision, which was the first third-party publisher, and I asked him, why do you think the video game industry crashed in 83? And he said he's single-handed responsible for that because he made it look easy in 83 to make good video games. And so at that Christmas, 83, a lot of crappy games were released. And he explained it like fathers would go in the shop and say, okay, I can get one good game or I can get 30 for the same price. So I will get 30 because then I will be the hero of my child. And of course, those actually were crap. And so a lot of those games didn't sell, and that is why the whole industry crashed. Well, and then I was asking the same question last week when I did an interview Miss Nolan Bushnell, who was the founder of Atari and also did the Pong cabinet, and I asked him the exact same question, and he said no, he thinks it's because the Atari VCS hadn't have a successor, and everything was incompatible with each other, and there wasn't much progress in that area. And now let's connect it to the present. I mean, it was also not too sure until recently how the next PlayStation 4 will look like and if there will be a new generation, because then the question was, how much progress will there be? And just last week, at least in German media, it was discussed how much further can CPU development be? How much faster it can be? How much can the games improve? Or will they be at some point stopped and there will be no further development? If that happens, then maybe the video game industry would crash again. Well, let's hope this won't happen. So, well, and now somebody made a reasoning in the chat saying that maybe people will move more from consoles to PC. Yeah. Well, that's a good question. Will there be a movement again from the console to the PC? Well, for me personally, I don't have a modern console. For modern games, I'm using a PC. And for retro gaming, I'm using consoles. So maybe, yeah. Right. All right. So that was more the bit of the past and the past history. So what I'm doing right now. So where are we heading right now? That's the question. Right. So my plans right now for Scene World and what I'm doing right now, interesting right now, is we are trying to cover, as I said before, new things, new happenings in the video game industry, but also kind of focusing on the old, kind of a mixture. I mean, who would have thought that 34 years after the release of the Commodore 64, there will be a Wi-Fi modem, or maybe you heard it, there will be a pet phone, you know, um, you know, and we we did some reviews on that, on the Wi-Fi model, the Wi-Fi card for the C64, and we also did the only and first English review of the pet phone, which is quite interesting because the pet phone has nothing to do with the Commodore PET, but it has some emulators to play C64 and Amiga games on it. So, right. Yes, and also another statement I see here is if things are more shifting towards mobile, I don't know. That's interesting because some games that we talked about with the pioneers, for example, Maniac Mansion, Zack McCracken, and so on, they are actually re-releasing 34 years old games for iPhone, or Android. And as it was mentioned here, things going exclusively. Well, as we all know, sometimes publishers change their mind. So we are going towards a development where instead of making many new games, there's another second development in the indie development and the retro development, picking up old concepts and reusing them, or creating new concepts. I mean, just recently we had an interview with the development studio in Serbia that would work on the new part of Equinox 4. And Equinox is actually a game that I played like 20 years ago when I was a teenager. And here is where things went surprising for me, because we were like approaching the publisher. We were like, okay, there's a new Kickstarter here, and it's Equinox 4. Equinox 4 is great because that's a game I know from my childhood, and they are making the 5th part of it. That's because the first part was named differently, not Equinox. So anyway, what happened here is I contacted the publishing studio in Austria and asked if we could do an interview, with them about the Kickstarter, about the Equinox 4 coming up. And they said, oh, actually, we are not developing it ourselves. It goes to our underwater expert, Norbert, which is in Serbia. So it's funny because we did that interview, which is a video interview that can also be seen on our YouTube channel, youtube.sceneworld.org, if anybody's interested. And like 2 or 3 weeks later, I had a phone conversation with the leading editor of a German PC Games magazine. And he was telling me, at this point you released the interview for your retro fan podcast. You were actually the only one publishing anything on that topic, Equinox 4, because they wouldn't tell the normal press about it. So it's interesting that we were like kind of the first that were able to talk about the game. That was kind of an interesting thing here for me, because when you do a publishing thing like a magazine or a podcast or something, you don't know how things look like from the outside, because you do your thing, but you don't know how people actually react to what you do. Of course, apart from comments on your YouTube videos or emails that we receive, but you don't know what other magazines are thinking. So it's what was quite nice to hear. Okay, we had an impact here, and also kind of the life changed a bit, for me personally, because suddenly I receive calls from abroad on my mobile. I'm like, who is that guy from Denmark again? Oh, it's from that game company, right? And for example, our main host on the podcast, HA, he was going to an old electronics store and buying some old, Commodore parts, some old retro parts, and they were like, your voice sounds familiar to me. Did I hear your voice before? Do you do anything on the internet? And he was like, yes, I'm doing this podcast for Scene World, the Scene World podcast thing. Yeah, Scene World, we have heard that before. We are actually subscribed to your podcast. We hear it every time. And he was like, well, really? Yeah, we have to keep up on that, So, and normally you start pretty small with, okay, maybe you get like 100 subscribers, 300, 400, 600. And you look at the statistics and look, okay, how many people are actually listening to what you talk about, And suddenly you are like, wow, 4,000. Are you serious, And or at the bakery, people ask you, did I see your face before? I'm like, yes, I'm doing this interview thing on YouTube where I interview tech pioneers, video game pioneers, and so on. Well, good question. Is it a solo project or was it a team thing since the beginning? Well, right now we are 21 people, but it started as a team project already. As I said, we started as a diskette magazine for the Commodore 64. And so at the beginning we were like 5 people, then it started to become 10 people, then we became 21. And it's also worth to mention that many of us actually worked in that field, what they do right now for Scene World, before. So for example, our expert on video games and console games actually is a video game reviewer in real life, and our podcast host AJ actually was a radio host in his previous life, So so we are using the skills of our team members to unite and make this unique thing, and we have team members from all over the world. So we even have a team member from Lima, Peru. So actually I went to Lima, Peru in 2013 and visited him for 3 weeks. and some other friends I had in Lima. And that's interesting because a lot of people even don't know that there's indie development, retro gaming, retro computer scene in Lima, Peru. And well, so the team is kind of divided, not everybody is involved in the podcast, not everybody is involved in the Twitch show, not everybody is involved in YouTube, and not everybody is involved in the Disc magazine. It's kind of a how to say, separated thing. Well, not entirely. It's like the Disc magazine. Everybody's working on all team members because that's our core thing. This is how we started. And this is also the reason why we are at Gamescom, because we are the only Disc mag on Gamescom, and our task at Gamescom is to show people what a Disc mag is. That there was something before the Kindle. There were electronic disc magazines on disc. So we have this big team where everybody is working on the Disc magazine, and then we have this YouTube team that is actually doing reviews of hardware and software on YouTube videos. And then we have the podcast team, which is AJ and me, though the 2-people team for the podcast. And then we are also attending on fairs and meetings, and there everybody is doing that on the location where he lives. So, for example, Gamescom I'm doing because I'm in Germany, and our editor from the Netherlands will join us too. So from the Netherlands and me, we are the 2 people that will be at Gamescom running the booth together with the video game guys. So as said, we have a combo booth there, Hans Highscore and SteamWorld. So we have music and the magazine on the same booth. It was very, very successful, and we had last year the luck to be right at the entry of the hall. So everybody had to see it when they were passing it. So this is how the team divides. So YouTube team, the magazine team where everybody's a member of, podcast team, and separated going to events. I think this should answer the team assignments question, hopefully. So, right. So this is how it's actually organized. As I said before, there can be more read about that on our entry on Wikipedia. And also, if you have questions about that after my talk here, you can also contact us and contact me at contact@steamworld.org, or just using the contact page at steamworld.org. And that email address will directly lead your email to me. So if you have any questions. Yeah. And yes, we've also got Twitter. So my personal Twitter would be Nafcom, Nafcom, which is also my nickname in the Commodore 64 scene. And we also have a magazine related and podcast and other stuff related publishing Twitter, and that would be scene_world. That are my 2 Twitter accounts. Right. Well, thanks for the 20 minutes warning. Right. So, yes. So, where are we else? Yeah, as I said, we are on Twitter. We are also on all the other channels like YouTube, like youtube.sceneworld.org. And we are also on Twitch, which would be twitch.tv/sceneworld if you want to follow us. And maybe I should talk about that next, because that is also where you have kind of an audience in the chat when you do a Twitch thing. And one of our most successful Twitch shows were actually two things. Once I made a Twitch show about Commodore 64 games played on the internet and connected to each other. And that's quite interesting because we had this developer of those games, and it never has been done before live, and we did that live. Yes, I will put the links here. So let me just put the links here. So one Twitter is at wait, this is mine here, twitter.com/navcom, and then is the second Twitter of the magazine would be twitter.com scene_world. Right. So that are the two Twitter accounts, and you can follow it. So anyway, those were our recent shows that we had, and I also should put in the Twitch thing, I think, because I was just mentioning that. So that's twitch.tv/sceneworld, and our page would be sceneworld.org. Right. So, talking about experience before I end, maybe some interesting things, or maybe open that you would like to ask now before I move on in the last 15 minutes. Right. Those are all the links. Thank you for the help. Yes, I'm new to that program, didn't use it before. So I'm just learning here a bit. Right. So somebody is typing. Let's see. Oh, right. Okay. No, HTTP put in front. My bad. I thought it would auto-sense and adding it automatically. Well, that's also some things that I noticed when we had a scene.world URL. Facebook didn't know what's a .world. Is that even a domain? Right. Okay, so the question is, what are the struggles in starting SceneWorld? Well, the struggles were like, in 2001, everybody was like, okay, America is dead regarding Commodore 64 Retro. There's nothing interesting happening here. Why would you like to do that? Why would you like to do something on a well, on an 18 years old platform like a Commodore 64? That was a struggle, that people didn't believe that the whole concept would actually work out. Well, it did. And it even started like this, that a few weeks after release, the first issue of SceneWorld 1 in January 2001, and I was coming home from my education, from my educational school, and mom was saying, there was somebody from the radio calling earlier. Like, why would somebody call from the radio? I don't know anybody from the radio. And then she would say, "Oh, it's from the German radio channel Bayern 3. They want to talk to you." Why? I don't know why, but he will call again in an hour. Well, he did, and it was actually somebody from the radio, and he was like, "Well, I'm doing a show at night about the Commodore 64, and I heard you're doing a new magazine on diskette, and I would like to interview about it." So, despite the struggles and people telling me the whole concept isn't interesting and nobody's interested about old crap anyway, suddenly I was on the radio. That interview is in German. It is pretty short, but it also can be seen on our YouTube. Well, I should maybe put in here the link of our YouTube, and now I will do it with the HTTP, just to make sure that that is clickable. Okay, let's see. That should work, right? Right. So, any other questions so far? Oh, right. Well, thanks for the follow. That's a good question. What's my thought about violence in video games? Yeah, especially since we have this attacks here in Bavaria in the last weeks. Well, that's also a question I ask Ralph Bear, the inventor of home video gaming. And I think that if somebody goes insane and shoots others and so on, school shooting, street shooting, whatever shooting, or terrorist attacks or whatever, bombings or whatever, I don't think that video games, are the reason for that. And every time politics can't find the real reason for something, they pull out violent video games. Oh, there's something. Violent video games. That must be it, because he played violent video games. Well, I played them too, At my school, in classroom, when I was a teenager, when I was, 14, 15, 16, we played Duke Nukem 3D, We loved all the voice acting, and I didn't go wild and killed anybody because I played video games, because I was shooting video games, people in video games, but not in the real world. So I don't think that violence in video games causes you to be a killer. And, well, the impact on the society. Good question. Well, I think did become our society more violent because of violent video games? I don't think so. I mean, I was playing Seawolf on the Commodore 64 that was also on the index. I mean, Doom is no longer on the index here in Germany, despite it was forbidden, to play by underage people. Yeah, right. And also a good point here, video games can actually be released for those with violent urges. Well, the thing is, yes, you can use it to release frustration. You can use it to release anger. It's true, everybody has that, and it's actually better to release them in a video game than punching a hole into your room's wall, right? So, is the USK really restrictive, as they say? Well, that's actually the premium for judging video games. Depends. Okay, here's an example. There was Command and Conquer Generals. You know, it was in 2003, I think. And I was telling my dad, when the game is going to be released, buy it for me instantly. Because I fear, due to the war that's happening in Iraq right now, at that time, that they could remove it from the shelves. Because there are some missions in there, anti-terror and like missions in Iraq, missions as a suicide bomber. And actually, a few weeks after that, they actually removed it from the shelves, and they urged Electronic Arts to make a new version called Generäle, which was just released here in Germany with totally different missions. So I think that was kind of restrictive. On the other hand, the USK released the ban of Doom, which on the other hand is not real restrictive. And I was actually interested to see that the latest Mortal Kombat wasn't well restricted over here in Germany, so I had no problem buying it. Right. So I will say it depends on the case. It's not an urban legend. Can depend. All right. My opinion on the retro gaming being introduced to the younger generation, especially the mini NES console coming out. Yes, I've read about that. And I think it's such a bad deal. I mean, I had a lot more fun with the DTV, the Direct TV C64, because it was a real C64 that you could connect on your TV, and you could actually solder on the connectors for the disk drive and load all your games, and actually have a modified one myself. So I think the retro NES console is a kind of a cash cow, because it doesn't allow you to plug in your game consoles, and I think it only has like 30 games on it. Not really all that great. Not all games are really good games there. So I think you really should get a NOAC device, NES on a chip device. So a portable NES instead. That allows you to plug in all your old games. That's my opinion. So rather get a NOAC device, NES on a chip device. A lot better than this NES console. But among my cycle, among the retro collectors, it's already said that the NES console is going to be a collector's item. So if you want something with value, get one now, right? It's also, I think it's good to have old console, old gaming appealing for younger generations, because I think they should know what games looked like back then, what diskettes are. Such things are important. Education in the past history is important, and this is why I'm very happy that I'm able to interview tech pioneers via video, Skype video, like Alexei Pechetnov for the Tetris, and I was actually making him watching me while I was playing Tetris live during the interview. This was a lot of fun. So yes, so I think it's important for the younger generation to know what was before they was born. Yeah, that's my that was my answer to that question. Right. So, interesting remark about the Tetris music. Yes, actually, I made that waiting music on my home phone. So when I put somebody on hold on the home phone, they can actually hear the Tetris music. What up to what level do you think can esports bring change in the global gaming industry and its growth? Well, I think it's very important because if you watch my interview with Alexei Pechetnov, he actually did, I think it was 2 years ago in the summer, he released an esports version, especially for that purpose on of Tetris. So if you realize that even developers like Alexei Pechetnov know that esports are very important, then I think it has a big influence on the video game industry. Yes. So what events are we going to cover next at SteamWorld? Well, the next events hopefully will be a special live act at Twitch in August, hopefully, with Vanessa Ortega, who is one of the champions at Dead or Alive, and she is a e-gamer, and we will make a stream with her. We will run our booth at Gamescom, so you can visit us at the Gamescom booth and chat with us. And we will also cover Gamescom from a retro perspective, and also cover some new games there from Gamescom. So I will have interviews with Electronic Arts, Konami, and so on. That's what we are going to cover next. That's the two things that we are planning right now. Right. And a video game con will also be covered. We have our editor, AJ, going to New Jersey at a video game con and report about that as well. So check that out if you want to know more. Okay, so 2 minutes left. Final question. If I have a special insight on virtual reality, yes, we did an interview about augmented reality, virtual reality with Jerry Ellsworth, who is actually working on a product there that is supposed to wipe everything else away. So if you want to check that out on our YouTube channel, youtube.steamworld.org, we'll watch out for the Jerry Ellsworth interview. Research for that, and that's the insight we've got on the topic virtual reality, artificial reality. Right. Okay, guys. So looks like we got the hour full. Thanks for your participation. Thanks for your question. Yeah, link to our YouTube. Well, I will put that here. YouTube. youtube.sceneworld.org. And just use the search, and then you will find Cherry interview should put you there. Okay, thank you, guys. Have a good day, good evening, good night, whatever you're having. Well, you're welcome. Thank you for listening. I hope it was quite interesting and not too boring. And keep in touch. Send me an email, contact me, whatever you like. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you so much. Give us just a couple of moments, and we will be going right into our next speaker, Crispy Critter. He's Chris Butstack. He is the CEO of Symbio VR, and he's going to be talking to us about virtual reality peripherals here in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned, folks.